It always began with the staircase. When the new owners first moved into the former Beverly Hills mansion of Buster Keaton, they were more intrigued than frightened. The marble staircase, wide and echoing, was one of the home's signature features, a place where guests once claimed Keaton would rehearse his famously precise physical gags. But almost immediately, something odd surfaced. Neighbors recalled that the staircase light seemed to flicker at the same hour every evening, as if on a timer no one had set. The electrician brought in found no faulty wiring, no loose switches. Still, the light continued to waver, as if replaying a cue from a scene long since filmed. Within the first week, the family noticed another detail. In what they called the movie room, a chamber lined with heavy curtains, and once used as a private screening space, there were faint scuff marks across the floor. The marks weren't random, they formed repeated arcs, like someone rehearsing pratfalls or sliding across the polished wood. The cleaning staff tried to scrub them out, but by the following week, the arcs had returned, faint but unmistakable. Neighbors began to talk. One, a man who had lived across the street since the 1970s, remembered how delivery trucks often came and went at strange hours when the house stood vacant. It was almost like someone inside was still running film reels, he said. Another claimed she had walked her dog past the house at midnight and heard the faint rolling click of an old projector, even though the home was dark. The family decided to test the rumors. They set up a digital recorder in the movie room, leaving it overnight. The playback captured hours of silence until just after 1 a.m., when the faint scrape of shoes and the hollow thud of something heavy striking the floor echoed through the speakers. No voices, no laughter, just the precise sound of a body falling, followed by silence. What made this harder to dismiss was that Keaton was known for rehearsing falls over and over, drilling the sound of impact until it was second nature. The sounds matched almost perfectly with the rhythm of his old routines. For weeks, the new owners debated whether to tell anyone. They feared being dismissed as superstitious or mocked for playing into Hollywood legends. But the staircase kept flickering, the marks kept reappearing, and the recordings only grew stranger. In one, faint piano notes drifted through the static notes that seemed to echo from a long-forgotten silent era. And so the question remained. Was this simply the house settling, the acoustics of old marble and wood playing tricks? Or was the genius of silent comedy still moving, rehearsing, somewhere inside his former home, forever falling, forever getting up again? The first real unease began not with a sound, but with a pattern. Every evening, without fail, just as the sun lowered behind the hills and the living room windows took on a faint copper glow, the staircase light faltered. It wasn't a simple flicker, the kind caused by loose wiring or a failing bulb. It dimmed in a measured rhythm, a slow fade and return, as if cued deliberately, like a stage light directed by someone who still thought in terms of rehearsals and performances. The new owners tried everything, replacing bulbs, calling electricians, even rewiring the fixture entirely. Still, the light behaved as though someone was directing it from an unseen booth. The staircase itself had an unsettling presence. It was carved of pale marble that caught the smallest reflections. The gleam of a candle, the ripple of headlights passing on the street, even the faint glimmer of a phone screen at night. Standing at the base of it after midnight, one had the peculiar sensation of being observed from above, though the landing always appeared empty. Visitors mentioned it casually, funny feeling up there, they would say, forcing a laugh, but the homeowners stopped lingering near it. They found themselves using the back stairwell more and more, as if instinctively avoiding the grand marble steps that had once been a showpiece. The movie room, tucked deeper into the house, began to demand more attention. It was a strange chamber, lined with thick velvet curtains that still held the scent of dust and faint cigar smoke, though the fabric had been cleaned repeatedly. At first, the family thought little of the faint scuff marks that traced across the floorboards, curved as though someone had slid or rolled across the surface. But after the marks reappeared, despite being polished away, they grew harder to dismiss. They came back in arcs, in straight dashes, in strange overlapping patterns. The homeowners could almost picture a body tumbling, rising, and tumbling again, an echo of rehearsal, physical comedy carved into the very wood. One late night, Unable to sleep, the husband decided to test the old rumors with his own eyes. He set up a chair in the movie room and turned off the lights, leaving only the faint glow from a street lamp filtering through the curtains. Hours passed, nothing but silence and the occasional tick of the house settling. But just past 1 a.m., he swore he heard it. The creak of weight shifting on the boards, the sudden thud of impact, and then the silence that follows a fall. No laughter, no recovery, just the sound itself, stark and unfinished. He left the room without daring to look back, his body cold as though he had been sitting outdoors. The neighbors continued to feed the unease. One woman, whose family had lived nearby since the late 1960s, spoke of how the house always seemed awake. Even when no one lived there, she said, you'd hear things. Not voices, not really. More like rhythms. Knocks. Bangs. Like a performance being rehearsed behind closed doors. She remembered walking past on midnight strolls with her dog and hearing what she described as a chattering clack. Like an old film projector running. Another neighbor swore that the light above the staircase could be seen dimming from the street, flickering across the front windows like a signal. The family decided to capture evidence. They set a small digital recorder in the movie room and left it overnight. The following morning, they played it back, expecting silence or static. For the first hour, that's all there was. But at precisely 1:07 a.m., there came the sound. A scrape of shoes, a stuttering thud as though someone had struck the floor, and then faint, nearly buried in the hiss of the recorder, the echo of a single piano chord. Not a full melody, just one sustained note, pressed hard enough to resonate in the recording before fading away. They tested the piano in the house. It was out of tune but still playable. No one had touched it that night, and the instrument was far too heavy to vibrate on its own. Still, the sound was captured. They repeated the experiment twice more in the weeks that followed. Both times, just past 1 in the morning, the sounds returned. A fall. A scrape. Once, even the faint squeak of laughter, or what could have been laughter, though distorted into something brittle and short. The house began to feel less like a home and more like a set left standing too long after the production had ended. Rooms that should have felt comforting were instead staged, lit by memory rather than intention. Guests who visited were struck by the strangeness of it all. Some admired the history, noting Buster Keaton's genius and legacy, but others admitted privately that the home gave them an unfinished feeling, as if something vital had been left behind when he died, a performance never quite concluded. The owners tried to rationalize it. Old wood, old wiring, the natural acoustics of a mansion built in another era. But each test only added another unexplained detail. It was never dramatic, never doors slamming or objects flying. Instead, it was subtle, unervingly precise, as if the house itself was replaying fragments of Keaton's craft. The light cue, the fall, the chord, the echo. And the strangest part was that these weren't chaotic disturbances. They were rehearsals, almost ordered in their repetition. The marble staircase would dim at dusk, the scuff marks would return by morning, and just past 1 a.m., the sounds of silent comedy minus the laughter would rise again in the dark. The family found themselves asking quietly whether this was a haunting at all, or simply the house remembering its former owner in the only way it could through endless rehearsal, endless falls, and the faint ghost of applause that never quite comes. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. The unease grew not in bursts of terror, but in layers. It was as if the house was peeling itself open slowly, showing its history in fragments the new owners could not ignore. By the second month, they had stopped dismissing what they heard at night as tricks of the ear. The pattern was too consistent, too rehearsed, almost as though they were listening to a script that repeated every evening. The marble staircase became the centerpiece of this quiet disturbance. During the day it stood silent and grand, sunlight catching across its polished surface like a museum exhibit. But in the hours after midnight, the staircase seemed to breathe. The couple began leaving a phone camera running overnight, pointing up toward the landing. Most mornings, the recordings showed nothing but the still frame of white stone bathed in grainy darkness. Yet twice, on different nights, the footage picked up a strange shift in shadow. Not a figure, not anything defined, but a sudden darkening at the top landing, as though something had briefly blocked the faint glow of the night light and then slipped away before it could take form. They tried to recreate it with friends, moving across the landing with flashlights, but the angles never matched. One afternoon, while cleaning, the wife noticed faint indentations along the banister, small grooves in the marble rail, too shallow to be called damage, but oddly uniform. She ran her fingers across them and realized they lined up almost like hand placements, a series of grips worn into stone that should have been impervious. The idea unsettled her. How many times had someone leaned there, balanced there, perhaps even slid down deliberately in the way Keaton once staged his falls? Was it possible that the banister itself remembered? The movie room, however, remained the most difficult place in the house. The owners started to avoid entering it altogether. They had closed the heavy curtains, hoping to block out the sense of being in a performance hall, but the weight of the air inside seemed unchanged. Dust collected faster in that room than anywhere else in the house, settling across the furniture in fine layers even when it had just been polished. And always, the marks reappeared on the floor, as though invisible rehearsals were being conducted at night. On one occasion, the husband decided to film the room overnight with audio and video. Reviewing the footage the next morning, he was met with hours of silence. But then, just past 1 a.m., something subtle appeared on the video. The curtains at the far wall seemed to draw inward slightly, as though caught in a draft. The family had checked repeatedly. There were no vents near that wall. Immediately after, the audio recorded a faint creak, followed by 3 rapid thuds. They were not random noises. They came in a rhythm, the unmistakable cadence of a rehearsed fall. What made it worse was that after the 3rd thud, there was silence, and then so faint it nearly escaped notice, a single clap. One. Just one. When they shared this evidence with a neighbor, the older man simply nodded. "That's him," he said quietly. He rehearsed until he couldn't stand. He'd fall and fall again, and then when he hit it just right, he'd give himself a clap. Everyone on this street remembers the sound of it. The neighbors' recollections became more vivid as word spread. A retired film editor who lived nearby told them that Keaton would often invite small audiences of friends to preview his scenes in that very movie room. "We'd sit in those chairs," he said, pointing toward where the owners had placed new furniture. "And he'd pace the floor in front of us, practicing falls before showing the reel. The man rehearsed his body like other people rehearsed lines." This explanation should have comforted the family. It grounded the disturbances in memory rather than malice. But the precision of it, the way the sounds aligned with the testimonies, made the atmosphere heavier. They weren't dealing with vague shadows or creaks of an old house. They were hearing movements with purpose, rhythms with intention, a choreography still being played out decades later. The piano incident remained the most difficult to explain. One night, after another strange chord appeared on a recording, the wife sat alone in the darkened living room and listened carefully. Just past 1, when she expected the scrape and thud from the movie room, a sound reached her instead from the piano. It wasn't a full tune, not even a full chord this time, just 2 notes pressed together, low and resonant, vibrating faintly through the air. She turned on the lights instantly, but the keys were still. She touched them, cold. The silence that followed was heavier than the sound itself, as if the house had offered her a fragment of its performance and then closed the curtain. The family debated moving, but selling a mansion in Beverly Hills was not a casual decision. Friends told them they were lucky to own a home with such history, a place tied forever to one of Hollywood's greats. Yet history was not the same as presence, and the house did not feel empty. Even during daylight, the owners began to notice moments of pause, entering a room and feeling watched, standing in the hall and sensing they had interrupted something. The marble and velvet and would seem to hold more than just architecture. They held a man's life work, fragments of comedy rehearsed so often that the house itself had memorized them. The true question was no longer whether they were imagining things. It was whether the house was trying to show them something, repeating the same patterns night after night until someone finally understood. By the 3rd month, the family understood that they could not live in the mansion as if it were a normal home. Every attempt to normalize the space, rearranging furniture, repainting walls, Flooding the staircase with light only emphasized what could not be changed. The house was not a blank slate. It carried with it a rhythm, a memory, a cycle that refused to be erased. The decision to conduct one final test came late one evening, after yet another recording had picked up the scrape of shoes and the sound of a fall in the movie room. This time, instead of leaving the equipment behind and fleeing to the safety of their bedroom, the owners decided to stay in the house and face whatever would happen. They invited two friends, both skeptical, both curious to spend the night with them. The four of them settled into the movie room just before midnight, with only a dim lamp in the corner. The curtains were drawn shut. The piano sat in silence against the wall. At first, there was nothing but stillness. The group spoke in hushed tones, laughing nervously, sipping wine to calm themselves. The hours stretched. Midnight passed. Then 12:45. Then 1 o'clock. Just as fatigue began to press on them, the air seemed to change. It was not colder, exactly, but denser, as though the room had been filled with invisible weight. One of the guests stopped speaking mid-sentence, frowning, and whispered, "Do you hear that?" It began faintly, a shuffle, as though a shoe had dragged across wood. Then, clearer, a series of footsteps that crossed the room in front of them. None of them moved, none dared to speak. The steps reached the center of the floor, and then came the sound they had dreaded but expected. The sudden thud of a body striking the boards. It was followed by silence so sharp it made their ears ring. And then, just when the silence became unbearable, a single sound broke it. The sharp crack of two hands clapping once. The lamp in the corner flickered at the exact same moment, as if responding to the gesture. The guests were shaken, but curiosity overcame fear. They remained seated, waiting. For nearly half an hour, nothing more occurred. Then, as if closing the act, a low piano chord pressed itself into the room, long and resonant. This time, the keys moved. All four of them saw it, the faint depression of two ivory keys sinking and rising again without a visible hand. That was enough. The guests left before dawn, pale and unwilling to discuss what they had seen. The family remained, but their decision was already forming. This house was not meant to be tamed by new occupants. It was not violent, not threatening, but it belonged to something larger than them, something that replayed itself without end. In the days that followed, the family consulted historians, film archivists, anyone who could explain what they had experienced. They discovered that Keaton had indeed used the house as a rehearsal space, not just a home. His falls were perfected in private, his timing rehearsed to the point of obsession. Neighbors from decades earlier recalled hearing him practicing alone well into the night. For a man whose genius was measured in precision, it seemed fitting that the house would hold those rehearsals even after his death, like grooves worn into the air itself. The owners put the mansion on the market quietly. They told the realtor to emphasize its history, its architecture, its ties to old Hollywood. They did not speak of the recordings or the clapping or the piano keys. Some stories, they felt, would only drive people away or worse, attract the wrong kind of interest. When they finally locked the doors and left for the last time, the wife paused at the base of the marble staircase. The evening light was filtering through the tall windows, catching the railing in a pale glow. For just an instant, she thought she saw a shadow at the landing, slight, motionless, like a man waiting for his cue. She turned away without climbing. Neighbors say the house still feels alive. Some claim to see the lights dimming at dusk, even when the property is unoccupied. Others swear they hear faint impacts echoing across the street in the early hours of the morning. The stories have blended into the fabric of Beverly Hills legend, just another whisper among the grand mansions of old Hollywood. What makes this story different, however, is its consistency. There are recordings, there are witnesses, there are neighbors who have given the same accounts for decades. No monsters, no violent poltergeists, just a performance that never ends. A rehearsal looped into the structure of the house itself. Perhaps the truth is simpler than we think. Perhaps some lives are lived with such precision, such intensity, that their movements outlast them. For Buster Keaton, the genius of silent comedy, the stage was never a theater alone. It was every step, every fall, every perfectly timed accident. And in Beverly Hills, in that marble mansion, the stage has not yet gone dark. It is said that at 1:07 a.m., if you stand in the movie room with the lights off, you can still hear it. A scrape, a thud, and then, after a pause, a single clap. The last rehearsal of a man who never stopped perfecting the silence. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.